everybody, my name is Crystal and I'm with Charlotte County History Services, and today we are going to make a Spanish moss monster, this cute guy here. So the Spanish moss monster is a legend that we have in the state of Florida, and he is known to have moss just covering his whole entire body. And he does scare certain people, but he doesn't hurt anybody. So some people might be going for a walk on the beach and all of a sudden they'll see a man kind of just pop out, just covered in moss with these amber glowing eyes, but then he just runs away. So some people have seen him from the 1960s, and there have been some current sightings of him today, and he is a famous cryptid in Florida. A cryptid is a creature that nobody has proven to exist yet. So we are going to make our very own Spanish moss monster today. He can be as scary or as cute as you want him to be. There are some other legends of Spanish moss. So what is Spanish moss? Spanish moss is all of that gray-green plant that you see that hangs all over the trees in the south of the United States, and especially here in Florida, we have tons of it. So a lot of people made up stories about where this moss came from. Now, in the 1500s, over 500 years ago, we had French explorers and Spanish explorers coming here, and they were kind of making fun of each other a little bit. And the Spanish explorers had these really long beards, and the French would call it barbe espagnole, which means Spanish beard. So originally, Spanish moss was called Spanish beard by these explorers coming to Florida and into the Americas. So eventually, that name stuck, and it turned into the term Spanish moss. But Spanish moss doesn't come from Spain. It's actually supposed to be in Florida. It is native to the southeastern United States. It does not kill trees, and it's actually related to pineapple. It's pretty crazy, huh? So a lot of other little bugs live inside of it, so that's why we are not using actual Spanish moss today. You have to be careful if you're trying to touch Spanish moss outside, because there's a lot of little bugs and creatures that live inside of it and make it their home. There's another Native American legend about Spanish moss as well, and they talk about the north wind, which was this cold, old, angry man, and then you have the south wind, which was this youthful, strong man, and they didn't like each other. And the north wind would come in and he would try to take over the south, and the south wind and the north wind would fight, and the north wind's long gray hair would get ripped out during this fight and now lays all over the trees in the south. And the south wind was successful in beating out the north wind and keeping out the cold. That's why it's so warm here in Florida and in the south. So now that we know a little bit more about Spanish moss, or Spanish moss monster, and some of the historic legends about Spanish moss in Florida, we can go ahead and start making our project. First, we're going to use some aluminum foil, and these are things that you should have around your house. And I'll give you some other things that you could use in place of these if you do not have them at home. So you're going to take some aluminum foil. We also are going to need some glue. You're going to need some scissors. You're going to need some paintbrushes. We're also going to use some old newspapers or any advertisements that you have that come in the mail to us, or any other scrap paper that you have at your house. We'll also need a bowl to put the glue, water, and paint in. So we'll go through step by step, and as I do talk about our project, I'll give you some pointers and tips. And if you don't have paint or you don't have a certain item, there's always other things that you can use at home, such as markers or crayons. We'll always find something that you can use in place of it. So we have aluminum foil. You're going to take some of this aluminum foil, just rip some sheets of it off. It's going to be loud. And you have to be careful because it can get a little sharp if you press too hard, but we're going to just gently roll it up into a ball. We're going to make his head, right? So we have this ball for his head. You're going to keep taking aluminum foil. Now we need a body. So So we're gonna make the middle part of his body. You can kind of roll that up, attach it to your head, and we're gonna squeeze down. Look at that, he's starting to have a body now. And now we have something to connect his arms and his legs to. And there's no wrong answer. You can make your monster however you want it to look like. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine. So we're gonna make the arms. So I just rolled up the tin foil there so that's a straight line. And we're gonna attach that. We're gonna take it and just wrap it around like this. And you can twist it and squeeze it together. Everywhere you squeeze it, it just kind of attaches, just like magic. We're gonna make another one for his other arm. We're gonna do the same thing so that his arm reaches out to the other side. Squeeze it all together. And now we're gonna make the base. We're not gonna make 2 legs because that's too hard to make them stand and it'll fall over pretty easily. So we are going to make a flat base. So you're going to wrap it around the bottom. You're gonna just squeeze it around like this, and we're gonna, I'll move this a little bit. We're going to just push him down onto the flat surface of your table until he stands up straight. And that's it. Now you have the insides of your Spanish moth monster. And now we are going to do some paper mache. So now we need to put some of the outside layers of the Spanish moth monster on. So what I did is we took some glue. You need about 2 parts glue, 1 part water, and I added some green paint to this mixture. That way when we're using our paper, when we're putting this mixture onto our paper, it'll make it green. And then we won't have an extra step to paint it later. So you're going to take these strips, and I cut out just about 1-inch strips of newspaper, and you're going to use the mixture in your bowl, and you just put these pieces of paper over your bowl and just kind of put a little bit of this mixture over every part of the dry piece of paper. Now this is gonna be a little bit messy. That's why I have some newspaper down on the table. And don't wear your best clothes for this. And then what we're gonna do is start from one of the ends. You just wrap it around. And if it's too wet, you can just kind of push some of that off. You just wrap it around. All around, wherever there's tin foil, you're gonna wrap that around your monster. You're gonna do this around his whole entire body, and it's okay if it's not perfect, if it doesn't stick perfect. See, like this part's hanging off, you can even just kind of rip it off and lay it back down. The more layers that you put on here, the easier it will be to have them all stick together. So we're gonna do one more. Just make sure that you're not soaking it completely. You want it to have like a nice thin layer around it. You're just gonna wrap it all around. And there's no perfect way to do it. You're just trying to cover up every single piece where there's tinfoil on there until he's completely covered. All right, so once you have all of the paper mache covering your tinfoil, we are going to start putting on our Spanish moss to our Spanish moss monster. I found some nice light green paper, but you don't have to have this specific paper. You can use any other paper that you have at home. You can even use yarn or string, anything that you can find that looks like Spanish moss does. Just again, please do not go outside and get Spanish moss from the trees. So we are going to just cut pieces of our paper, and to get it to look nice and fringy like Spanish moss does, we're going to use our scissors and we are going to cut little strips into the pieces of paper. You can make little squiggly lines. It doesn't have to be straight. It's our Spanish moss, and Spanish moss hangs in so many different ways from the trees. So we're going to do it on one edge, and you can leave a little space in the middle of the piece of paper where you don't cut the lines. That way the piece of paper stays stuck together. So on the other side, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to cut lines, cutting our fringe for our Spanish moss. Be careful with your fingers too, don't cut your fingers. So you just leave like about a ½ an inch to an inch right there in the middle of our paper, and now we have our little fringe on the edge. So what I did to make it look even more like Spanish moss is I took the ends of my fringe and I just kind of grabbed it, and you can kind of bend it a little bit, so now it looks more like Spanish moss does, hanging from the trees. Gives it a little bit more texture. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take that middle part of your piece of paper, and you're going to, you can either apply some more of the paper mache glue if you have some of that left over, or you can use your glue bottle to add some glue right to the center here. And if your monster is still wet, he'll stick even more. The moss will stick even more to your Spanish moss monster. Then you're going to just take that middle part and drape it over your Spanish moss monster. And sometimes if you think that it's too long in a certain area, you could take your scissors and give him a little haircut. So you can make your Spanish moss look however you want on your monster. You're going to cover up wherever you want on your monster with Spanish moss. So we can do another strip. And we'll drape it on the other arm. And it can be, again, whatever length that you want it to be. I even added some extra little leaves I cut out of the newspaper. I found a nice colored picture from the newspaper, and I used that to cut out some little leaves to stick into my Spanish moss, because when you look outside, there's always some sticks and moss and leaves stuck into there. So I'm going to do what I did last time, and we're going to just crunch this up again, give it some texture, both sides. If you don't like how that looks, you can leave it flat too. We're going to add a little bit more glue right to the middle of our paper. And we're going to drape it over his other shoulder here. Pretty neat. So what do we do with the rest of him? Some of it we can't just drape over. So we are going to have to cut some smaller pieces. So let's say we want to cover the front of his body with some moss. So I'm going to look at how big the front of his body is, and we'll cut a piece of paper. I'll cut a little bit more off of here. And now I have a little square, and I'll do the same thing. We're gonna cut some little lines, but don't cut all the way through. You're gonna leave about a ½ inch again at the top of your paper here. That way all of your little pieces stay stuck together. Otherwise, you're gonna be putting these on one little tiny piece of moss at a time, which is okay too. If you have a lot of time, you can do that too. That's perfectly fine. So we're going to add some glue to the top right there. And we're gonna stick it, oh, I forgot a step. What did I forget? I forgot to crunch it up. Let's add some texture there. We're gonna stick it right on the front of our Spanish moss monster. So you can add hair. He has some cool hair hanging over the top of his head here. He has it all along his back. So you can add little pieces here and there all over your Spanish moss monster until he's completely covered with moss. After you are done covering him with Spanish moss, I added some amber glowing eyes. So a lot of the reports say with the Spanish moss monster, when they see him, he has these amber glowing eyes. So amber is like a yellow-orange color. So he has some nice orange eyes, and I made him a scary mouth. But you can make him a funny mouth if you want to, that's okay. And all I did was take a little bit of paint, and I have just a paper plate, but you can use anything that you have around with your parents' permission to add some paint. Just a little bit of drop is all you need to make the eyes. You do have to wait for your Spanish moss monster to be completely dry before you add any of the final touches, or it might get a little bit runny and run into the rest of the green paint that you have on there. But once it is dry, if you don't have paint, you can use markers or crayons to draw a face onto your Spanish moss monster. But once you do, once it dries, give it a few hours to dry, or even come back to it the next day. You can just use your paintbrush and put little dots onto his face for his eyes. Yours is going to look so much better. Right? So wherever you want those eyes on his face, yeah, see, he's a little bit wet here. This is why you wait till it dries. But in this one here, he was completely dry. I added the little dots for eyes. And there we have our Spanish moss monster.